Hello, I'm Annette Young and welcome to the 51%, a show about women reshaping our world. Coming up, Rwanda's children of rape and the mothers who raise them despite social stigma and no financial assistance. Also, how the definition of rape is changing these days. We talked to Olivia Smith, a British criminologist, on the need to improve and update the criminal process as a result. And making their mark, how Australian rules football is working hard to attract female players from minority communities. But we begin in Rwanda, where the horrifying magnitude of the 1994 genocide still resonates to this day. In just 4 months, 800,000 Tutsi were massacred, a slaughter orchestrated and overseen by the Hutu regime. An often forgotten fact is that rape was also widely carried out. Some women survived the ordeal and gave birth to their tormentor's child. Those children are now adults, and Julie Dungelhoff and Rob Parsons report on the struggles their mothers faced in bringing them up.
Her name is Jocelyn. She's 23. She was born just a few months after the end of the genocide, a child of the rape of her mother, a weapon of war that was used on a massive scale.
My mother took medicines to try and abort me, but unfortunately I, the fetus, resisted. When I was born, my mother didn't love me very much.
Her mother was then just 20 years old. Her entire family had been wiped out. She now had sole responsibility for bringing up her child, without a job and without any assistance.
It took me a long time to start to love my daughter. Men killed my little sister. And the man who raped me is the same man who raped and killed my big sister. My daughter told me that she wasn't to blame for her birth, that she wasn't responsible for the rape, that I couldn't hate her. But eventually, she forgave me. We forgave each other.
The victims of rape were ostracized by their own communities and faced constant discrimination. Their children were outcasts, and because they had no income, received no education. The state didn't immediately take responsibility for the women, but NGOs took up the challenge, like this one called Never Again. Marie-José is a psychologist. She's been going to the village for many years to listen to the women and their children.
These girls were raped while they were still children. They weren't married, so they weren't considered widows. Even if they lost their parents, they weren't considered orphans, because they were now mothers with children. They were told, you're not orphans, you're not widows, you're something else.
Thanks to Never Again, Jocelyn has been able to go back to her old school.
They don't understand how people can kill each other, how people who live together in the same society in a positive way could become enemies.
And yet the children in this classroom are the living proof that it did happen. But if they are the evidence of the horror that seized Rwanda, they are also this country's hope that whatever happened in the past, history need not repeat itself.
Now, in other parts of the world, the definition of what constitutes rape is slowly broadening. The Swedish Parliament has passed a bill that sex without consent constitutes rape, even when there are no threats or force involved. The new law stating that a person must consent to sexual activity with words or clear body language. Sweden's decision reflects a wider discussion on affirmative consent laws that's gathering force across the globe. This as countries like Germany and American states such as California add consent-based reforms to their legislation. Joining me now is Dr Olivia Smith, a criminologist from Anglia Ruskin University in the UK. Thanks for your time. The notion of affirmative consent is certainly gathering steam. Do you think other countries are likely to follow suit?
Yes, absolutely. We're increasingly recognising that rape is not just about violence or force, and so we're recognising that consent is something that's important for both parties. However, in those discussions, it's really important that we keep a sense that consent is very nuanced and also ongoing. So just saying yes once is not enough, and that has to happen in our discussions as countries move forward.
Are attitudes towards rape laws changing in this era of Me Too?
There's now much more recognition of the prevalence of sexual violence, and that's come from Me Too. However, there's an ongoing mistrust within culture. Women are still seen as more emotional than men, therefore more likely to be liars, and therefore they're not as believed. There's still a fundamental disbelief that many women are honest when they make allegations of rape.
And Olivia, you're talking there about how the onus is on the victims, on the women themselves, to prove that their story is true. And that itself is very tough, isn't it?
Yes, legally, it has to be the woman, the prosecution, who have to prove something has happened. And that can be really difficult because that's the opposite of what women need. When somebody has been raped, they fundamentally need to be believed. They need to have a sense of control over their story. And that is not what's possible within the legal system. And actually, within society, we also disbelieve women, particularly women of colour and women with mental health problems or disabilities. So we need to change the culture before we can change the law.
Yet again, in the United Kingdom, the Director of Public Prosecutions has recently apologised for failings in the criminal justice system after a review found that 47 rape or sexual offence cases were halted because evidence had not been properly shared with the defence. Now, this caused an outcry in your country and again reveals just how difficult it can be to prosecute rape cases.
Yeah, there are a number of issues here. Firstly, it's incredibly difficult to prosecute rape cases. The conviction rate for rape in England and Wales is only around 7% of cases that are reported to police will end in conviction. That's very, very low. The second thing is that actually disclosure is very complicated. It's about making sure the defence get the evidence that might help their case, and that's obviously important, but it has to be reasonable. And within rape cases, it's being very invasive. So we're expecting the victim to give their mobile phone over, to give access to all social media, medical records, counselling records, and actually there's no recognition of they have a right to privacy as well. So we are protecting the right to fair trial, but we're not necessarily considering the victim's rights within that.
Olivia, you spent 13 months observing rape trials in court. What did you find?
I found three main things. So the first is that the practicalities of going to trial were actually really difficult. So the victim was expected to go into the same entrance, they might be in the same smoking area, and so they were bumping into the defendant while they were in court. They were also being heckled. I saw people being heckled by friends and family of the defendant, and actually one victim left court to try and commit suicide because it was so stressful. The second thing I found was that there were myths and stereotypes about rape, who rape happens to, who does it, what happens afterwards. And these were fundamentally rooted within wider societal stereotypes about class, disability, gender. So, for example, I saw one victim being asked about drinking wine out of a mug rather than a glass as a sign of consent. And the third thing is that the right to a fair trial is a very important thing. We need to protect defendants' rights. However, they are being misinterpreted as the right to a favourable trial. And actually, everybody in that courtroom has human rights, and those other human rights are not being considered. We need to recognise that actually the criminal justice system probably will never be perfect. The criminal justice system will always have to test victims' evidence. The onus will always be on the victim. And so we need another set of sustainable funding for victim services so that they can have justice separate to the criminal justice system.
Olivia Smith, it's been great speaking to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, finally, heading back to my old stomping ground, and Australian rules football is not a sport traditionally known for diversity among its players, yet alone women. But that's starting to change in Western Sydney, as this report shows.
Not your average Aussie rules match. The Auburn Giants is at the forefront of the sport's push into multicultural Australia. These players from diverse backgrounds are challenging negative stereotypes about women and race.
You know, for a lot of people, when they see the positive stories about us, it's so exciting for them. It's like, oh my God, this is amazing. We're being reported on in a positive way, and what you do shows girls and people in our community what is possible.
Western Sydney is one of the fastest growing and culturally rich regions in Australia. About 60% of people here were born overseas. Traditionally, rugby league holds sway among the Lebanese community, the largest Muslim group in the region. But Australia's most popular sport has launched elite men's and women's teams in West Sydney over the past decade and is throwing money at the grassroots.
And that vision is a generational change for young kids who in 10, 15 years' time will be, I guess, knowledgeable about what AFL is, who the Giants are, and how to access, I guess, a game.
The club struggles to attract fans in large numbers, but is quick to brush aside any criticism.
With like any football club or soccer club or rugby club, the more work you do in the community, the more opportunity you get to open up your footy club for a new fan.
For a long time, Aussie rules was predominantly the domain of Anglo-Australian men. Today, though, the country's demographic is rapidly changing. And the AFL is banking on teams like this to better reflect the future makeup of the sport and Australian society.
Great to see. And that's it for now. You can connect with us via our Facebook page, that of course being France24.51%, or do send us a tweet at _51%. Thanks for your feedback so far. And yes, please do keep those comments and suggestions rolling in. So until our next show, bye for now.